I always believed that if the world ever ended, I would hear the sound of gunfire first, not a knock. But that night, it was a knock that started everything. 3 slow taps. Calm, careful, then silence. I froze where I stood, the coffee mug trembling in my hand. No one knew where I lived. I had built my bunker 30 miles from the nearest town, buried deep under layers of dirt, metal, and silence. I had cut myself off from the noise of the world because the noise was what killed people. For 10 years I had trained for this. I was ready for war, famine, riots, everything. But not for a knock. I placed the mug down and turned toward the steel door. Max, my German shepherd, lifted his head and growled. His ears were sharp, his eyes locked on the door. Another knock. Louder this time. Who is it? I asked out loud, though I knew no one should answer. No reply. Only the hum of the generator and Max's low growl. I moved toward the monitor wall and switched on the external cameras. The screens flickered to life, grainy images of the dark forest that surrounded my bunker. And then I saw him. A man stood outside the door. He was barefoot, wearing a torn shirt that looked soaked in blood. His hands were shaking. His eyes were wide open, staring directly at the camera. He mouthed something. At first I thought he was saying help. But when I zoomed in, I realized he was saying my wife. He pressed his face against the metal door and began to scream her name. The sound was so broken it barely sounded human. My instinct screamed at me to grab my rifle. My mind told me to stay quiet. But something inside me, the part that was still human, moved my hand to the door controls. I spoke through the intercom. Back away from the door. He stopped screaming. Slowly his head turned toward the camera. His eyes were empty, almost gray. Then, without a sound, he stepped backward into the darkness. For a moment I thought he had left. But the motion sensor light flickered again. He was still there, standing, not moving. Minutes passed, then hours. He did not leave. Max sat beside me, teeth bared. I kept watching the man, waiting for some sign of life. A blink, a twitch, anything, nothing. I tried to tell myself it was just shock. Maybe he had seen something horrible. Maybe he was in trauma. But then I saw something that made my stomach twist. He tilted his head just slightly to the side, like he was listening, and then he smiled. The smile was too wide, too stretched. It was the kind of smile you see in people who have forgotten what smiling means. I switched off the camera feed. I did not want to see him anymore. Hours passed. I sat by the door, rifle across my lap. Max never stopped growling. Around 3 a.m., the generator flickered. The lights dimmed. I heard a faint sound of metal scraping on the outer wall, then silence again. I whispered to Max, "It is nothing. It is just the wind." But deep down I knew the wind did not scrape metal. When dawn came, I opened the camera feed again. The man was gone. Only muddy footprints led away from the bunker door. But the last print faced toward the door, as if he had turned back before leaving. I walked to the door with my rifle ready. My hand rested on the metal handle. For a moment I considered opening it. Maybe he needed help. Maybe he was still alive. Then Max barked sharply. Through the small window slit I saw something that froze my breath. The man's face was pressed against the glass. His eyes were pale white now. His skin was gray, and he was smiling again. The smile never changed even when I fired through the glass. He fell backward without a sound, disappearing from view. I stood there staring at the smoke curling from the barrel of my rifle. Max whimpered once, confused. That was when I realized something. I had built this bunker to keep the world out. But I had never prepared for the world to come knocking back. That night I sealed the door for good. I turned off the generator and let darkness swallow the room. It was quiet again. But quiet felt different now. Because somewhere out there in that silence, something knew where I lived, and it was not human anymore. The night was too quiet. It was the kind of silence that feels like the world is holding its breath before something terrible happens. I turned on my shortwave radio again, hoping to hear a human voice, some sign that this was all still under control. For a few seconds all I heard was static. Then a voice broke through, weak but urgent. "This message is being transmitted on all frequencies. Mass hysteria has been reported in multiple cities. There are violent attacks happening nationwide. Shelter in place. Avoid contact with anyone showing signs of aggression. The National Guard has been deployed. The message was cut off by a burst of static and a distant scream. It did not sound like an ordinary scream. It sounded like someone being torn apart. My hand froze over the radio. I stared at it, waiting for the voice to return, but what came next chilled me more than the silence. A man's voice, trembling and strained, whispered into the microphone. "They are not people anymore. Do not let them in." Then nothing, just static again. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I had heard emergency broadcasts before. Wars, riots, natural disasters. But this one was different. It was not just panic. It was finality. I tuned to the restricted frequencies used by military units. Most were dead air, but one channel, one specific frequency, still had a faint signal. Condition black. Code Sierra 19. Repeat Sierra 19. I felt my stomach drop. That code was never supposed to be used on home soil. In my service days, it meant one thing: national collapse. If Sierra 19 had been declared, it meant that command had lost control. The government had failed, and the country had entered survival mode. For a moment, I just stood there, the radio humming softly in the dark, while my mind processed the impossible truth. Then my training took over. My emotions shut down like flipping a switch. I grabbed my checklist and began working through every protocol I had ever prepared. First, I sealed the bunker. Steel locks engaged. Reinforced panels dropped over the vents. I shut off all exterior power and switched to internal battery supply. I cut communication lines and silenced the generator. Every sound mattered now. Even a whisper could attract attention. Next, I checked my supplies. Food, water, fuel, medical gear, ammunition, all accounted for. Every can of food labeled by expiration date. Every bullet counted, every tool placed exactly where it should be. Years of preparation had turned into a mechanical rhythm. I had imagined this day 100 times, but imagination never felt this heavy. When the power grid failed, I knew it was real. The entire valley went dark in one sweeping blink. Streetlights died. Houses disappeared into shadows. Only the stars remained. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The distant noise of traffic was gone. The world had gone completely still. Then the broadcast returned. The voice was weaker now, broken by static, but still clear enough to hear the words that changed everything. Communication blackout in effect. Martial law declared. Infected individuals show extreme aggression and signs of... The rest was lost in noise. But that one word, infected, echoed through my head again and again. Infected. I turned the dial, searching for clarity, but all I found were broken fragments. Containment failed. The last defense was gone. Then I heard something else, not from the radio, outside. It started as a faint thump, like someone kicking a metal can. Then another. Then a scream. Not a distant one this time. It was close. Too close. I went to the steel hatch and pressed my ear against it. The scream came again, and this time I recognized the voice. It was Toby, the little boy who lived 2 houses down, Mr. Hall. "Please help us. They are hurting my mom. Please open the door." My heart sank. He was just a kid. I could still see his face covered in dirt and freckles when he used to wave at me while riding his bike. I grabbed the handle of the hatch. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely grip it. My brain screamed, "Open it." My instincts screamed, "Do not move." I knew what protocol said. No contact, no exceptions. But that was easy to follow when the voice outside was not a crying child. Then I heard something else behind his voice, a sound like wet breathing, then a growl. It was low and heavy, something no human throat could produce. The boy screamed one last time, and then there was a sound I will never forget. A crunch, like someone biting into raw meat, then silence. I stayed there, pressed against the cold steel, staring at the hatch as if looking hard enough could undo what had just happened. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, that I had misheard everything. But I could smell it now, the faint copper scent of blood seeping through the metal cracks. I went back to the radio and turned it up. I needed to hear something human, anything. The signal returned for a brief second. A woman's voice this time, eerily calm. "If you can hear this message, it is already inside your perimeter." Then the transmission cut out completely. No static, no hum, no signal, just silence. I sat there in the dark, gripping the edge of the table, listening. There was a faint scraping noise outside. Metal against concrete, slow and deliberate. It moved across my gate, stopped, then started again. It was as if someone or something was testing the strength of the steel. Every instinct in me told me not to move, not to make a sound. I sat completely still, staring at the shadows across the room. Even my breathing felt too loud. The silence thickened. It pressed against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat. And then somewhere deep inside that silence I realized something terrible. The world outside was gone, and the thing that had replaced it was learning how to find me. When the radio finally died, the silence did not feel empty, it felt alive. The first night after the broadcast was the longest of my life. The silence outside was worse than the screams. It was thick and heavy, like the air itself was holding something back. I sat in my bunker, the dim red light from the emergency bulb flickering across the metal walls. My ears rang from the quiet. Every small sound became magnified, a drop of water, the faint hum of the generator, the soft creak of steel expanding in the cold. I tried to sleep, but my body refused. My heart beat too loud. My thoughts kept replaying the voice of that boy, Toby. The way his scream had ended so suddenly, the smell that followed. I turned in my bunk, pressed my palms against my ears and tried to force my mind to silence, but then I heard something new. It was faint, distant, and deliberate. A metallic scratching, slow, irregular, and too measured to be the wind. At first I told myself it was nothing. Maybe loose debris outside scraping against the gate. Maybe the storm picking up. But then Max lifted his head. Max was my dog, a German shepherd I had trained for years. He had survived every drill, every exercise, every lockdown with me. He never barked unless he was certain of danger. But now he was growling, low and constant. His eyes locked on the steel hatch leading outside. The sound came again. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. Pause. It was rhythmic now, like someone dragging a piece of metal across the gate in slow circles. I stood up and went to the control desk. My hands hovered over the monitor switch. The power flickered once, and for a second I saw static dance across the screen. Then the cameras came alive. Rain. It was raining heavily outside, the kind of cold, unforgiving rain that blurred everything into shapes and shadows. My security cameras, 8 in total, showed every angle of the property. The gate, the fence line, the driveway, and the perimeter walls, everything looked empty. Then Max growled again, louder this time, and his gaze shifted toward the far left corner of the room, where Camera 4's feed displayed the main gate. I leaned closer. At first, I thought it was just the rain playing tricks. The camera quality was low in the dark, and the motion detection was flickering between red and green. But when lightning flashed, I saw it. Someone was standing at the gate. The figure was tall, completely motionless, facing the camera directly. The rain poured over its head, but it did not move, not even a flinch. It just stood there, head tilted slightly downward, staring straight into the lens. I felt a chill spread through my chest. My first thought was that it might be a survivor, maybe someone from the neighborhood seeking help. But there was something wrong with the way it stood. Too still, too balanced, no natural sway, no shifting of weight. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. The figure never moved. I watched it in silence while Max paced the floor, whining softly. Every instinct told me to ignore it, to walk away from the screen, but I could not. I was drawn to that frozen shape outside my gate. The rain was falling so hard now that it should have forced anyone to move, to shiver, to seek shelter. But this thing stayed perfectly still. Lightning flashed again, and for a split second, the camera glitched. When the image returned, the figure was closer. It was no longer by the gate. It was standing halfway up the driveway. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I rewound the footage, checking the exact frame where the flash had happened. There was no transition, no movement between frames. 1 second it was by the gate, the next it was several meters closer. Max began barking now, his fur standing on end, teeth bared toward the ceiling vent. I could feel the low vibration of his growl echoing through the floor. He was not barking at the cameras, he was barking at something I could not see. I switched between every feed, camera 1, camera 2, camera 3, but the figure was not visible anywhere else. Only camera 4 caught it, standing motionless in the rain, closer than before. I whispered to myself, trying to reason it away. It is a glitch. The rain is confusing the motion sensors. It is just fear. I am tired, but I did not believe my own words. My voice trembled. The lights flickered again. I turned to Max. He was now facing the hatch, tail rigid, ears pinned back. His eyes were wide and glassy, reflecting the dim red light. He was growling so deeply that I could feel the sound in my chest. Then the scratching came back. Not from the gate this time. From the vent above my bed, it was faint at first. A single drag of metal against metal, then another. Then a series of soft taps as if something was tracing its fingers along the vent cover. My mouth went dry. I aimed my flashlight at the vent, my pulse thundering in my ears. Dust floated down in small clouds as the tapping stopped. Then silence. I held my breath, waiting for the next sound. My flashlight flickered, and for a fraction of a second I thought I saw movement behind the vent slats. A shadow, thin and twitching. Then lightning struck outside again, lighting up the entire room through the security monitors. The figure was now standing right at the gate again, face almost pressed to the lens. The distortion made its features unreadable, but I could see the faint reflection of eyes, glassy, unfocused, and wrong. The generator coughed once, sputtering as the rain poured harder. I looked down to check the fuel gauge. It was stable, but the lights flickered anyway, dimming for a few seconds before returning. The cameras glitched again. The figure was gone. I switched between every feed, scanning each corner of the property, every shadow, every tree. Nothing. The driveway was empty. The fence line was empty. Even the gate was clear. Then Max stopped growling. He backed away slowly, ears twitching. His eyes locked not on the door, not on the cameras, but on the far corner of the room, right behind me. I turned my head, slowly, terrified to see what he saw. The generator flickered once more, the light dimmed, and every camera went black. For a second, I was surrounded by absolute darkness, and in that moment of darkness, I realized the figure was no longer outside. I woke up to the sound of alarms. It was not the usual soft beep of the motion sensors. This was a sharp, continuous shriek echoing through the bunker walls. My body reacted before my mind did. I rolled off the bunk, grabbed my rifle, and hit the emergency lights. Red light filled the room. The whole place pulsed like a heartbeat. Max was already standing near the door, barking and growling, his tail straight, ears flat against his skull. I looked at the monitor. The perimeter sensors were flashing red across every section of the property. The alert read, "Garage door movement detected." I froze for a second. The garage was on the far west side of the compound, built into the slope of the hill. It was reinforced steel, impossible to move without power. My power was still online, so how could it move? I slung my Remington shotgun across my shoulder, checked the chamber, and moved toward the inner door. My hands were steady, but my breathing was not. I switched the monitor to camera 6, the garage feed. The screen showed a faint trembling, the picture shaking as if something heavy was pushing from the inside. The steel door flexed inward for a moment, then settled back. The sensors kept flashing. I checked my backup pistol, made sure the safety was off, and slowly opened the bunker door. The corridor outside was dark except for the thin emergency lights running along the floor. Every step I took echoed louder than it should have. The scratching sound returned. Not from the vent this time. From the air duct running along the ceiling of the corridor. The sound was faint at first, like something dragging its way through the metal. Then came a hollow thump. Then another. Something was inside the ventilation shaft, moving. I aimed my flashlight upward. Dust fell from the vent slats. Max began barking louder, his teeth bared, his entire body vibrating with tension. The duct shook violently. I raised the Remington, took a step back, and the vent cover burst open. Something fell out. It hit the floor with a heavy, wet sound. For a moment I could not tell what it was. Then it lifted its head, its eyes were white. Skin pale and torn, blood leaked from its mouth in thin lines. Its fingers clawed against the floor as if it could not remember how to move. But it was fast. Too fast, it lunged. I fired once. The sound exploded in the small corridor, deafening and blinding. The creature's shoulder burst open, but it kept coming, dragging itself with its other arm. I stepped back, chambered another round, fired again. The blast tore through its chest. It fell flat, twitching. The smell of rot filled the air, mixed with gunpowder and wet metal. I stood over it, breathing hard, my hands trembling now. Its face looked human, but the mouth was stretched wrong. The jaw hung lower than it should have. The nails were dark, cracked, almost fused with the flesh. Then the vent above me shook again. Another sound. A scraping rush. I fired a round into the vent itself, the blast echoing through the bunker. Something inside screamed, a high, animal-like cry, and retreated into the duct. I reloaded quickly, every movement automatic. My training was the only thing keeping me from breaking down. I checked the dead body again. Its blood was darker than normal, almost black. It steamed on the cold floor. Max sniffed the air, barking toward the far wall. He was moving between 2 points, the vent and the garage door corridor, as if something was closing in from both sides. Then came the metallic clang from the west. The garage door. I ran toward the security panel and switched to the external camera feed. The garage door was shaking violently now, bending outward. The metal groaned under the pressure. I could see shadows moving behind it, at least 3, maybe more. I aimed my shotgun at the inner door, knowing it would not hold for long if they broke through. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the door while Max circled beside me, snarling at the air. Then the first blow came, a loud, hollow crash that echoed through every wall. The second came harder. The third one left a dent in the steel. I steadied my aim, trying to time my breathing with the rhythm of their hits. My mind raced through drills, breach response, containment, fallback procedure, but none of those prepared me for this. The door burst open. 3 figures fell through, covered in mud and blood. Their eyes were milky and unblinking. Their movement was jerky, but there was intelligence in the way they spread out, cornering me. I fired once, point blank. The first one's head snapped back, but the others did not stop. The second one rushed from the side, grabbing my arm. I could feel the bones in its fingers grinding against my sleeve. Its breath was hot and rancid. I drew my military knife and slashed across its throat. The blade caught on something hard, maybe cartilage, maybe bone, but it went down, gurgling. The third one came from behind me, silent, fast. I turned just in time to see its arm swinging toward my face. The blow sent me backward into the wall. My shotgun slipped from my grip. Before it could attack again, Max lunged. He hit it hard, teeth sinking into its neck, dragging it to the floor. The sound was wet and sharp. The creature thrashed, clawing at him, but Max held on, growling like a machine. I reached for the Remington, rolled, and fired once more. The shot blew half of its skull away. Silence followed. I stood in the middle of the corridor, panting, surrounded by blood and smoke. The smell was unbearable. My arms shook from exhaustion, but I forced myself to move. I checked every corner, every vent, every door. When I was sure the immediate area was clear, I sealed the vent openings with heavy metal plates. I welded the edges, ignoring the sweat running down my face. The generator hummed quietly in the background. I dragged the bodies into the airlock and sealed it shut. I knew I would have to burn them later. Max sat by the door, chest heaving, eyes wide. He was trembling too. I placed my hand on his head, trying to calm him, but I was shaking just as much. The monitors flickered again, static distorting every screen. When the image cleared, I saw them. Outside, beyond the fence line, there were more figures, dozens, maybe hundreds. They stood still, watching the cameras, silent, waiting. Then one of them tilted its head. Another crouched low, almost like it was preparing to move. That was when I understood something I had not wanted to believe. They were not wandering anymore. They were hunting. The night after the breach, I sat in front of the shortwave radio again. My hands were trembling, not from fear this time, but from exhaustion. The air inside the safe house felt heavy, filled with the metallic stench of blood and gunpowder. I had cleaned up the mess, burned the bodies, reset the traps. Yet silence was still my loudest enemy. I turned the dial slowly, sweeping through empty frequencies. Static whispered like distant waves. Then beneath the noise I caught it. 3 sharp tones, evenly spaced. A coded military signal. My heart slammed against my ribs. That pattern was not random. It was ours. I leaned closer, adjusting the knob with the precision of muscle memory. The voice came through faint, broken by interference, but undeniably human. Alpha, survivors, heading north. Extraction point, 20 miles. Stay mobile. Then another voice, tense and hushed. Repeat, civilians may show delayed infection symptoms. Trust no one unless verified. The words hit me like a bullet. Delayed infection symptoms. That was not in any report I had read. The virus was supposed to turn people in minutes, not hours, not days. I stared at Max, who lay near the door, his ears twitching even in sleep. My mind raced. If that transmission was real, it meant 2 things. There were survivors, and the rules had changed. I wrote down the coordinates, matching them with the map I had pinned to the wall. The extraction point was 20 miles north near an old fuel depot. 20 miles through chaos, through infected, through uncertainty. I had food, water, ammunition, and enough training to make it. But leaving the safe house meant abandoning the one thing keeping me alive: control. The radio hissed again, just as I was about to turn it off. The same signal repeated, weaker this time. Anyone alive? Repeat, no extraction at dawn. Dawn. That gave me less than 6 hours. I packed my bag slowly, methodically. Water, rations, ammo, medical kit. Every item had a purpose. Every second mattered. But even as I packed, a shadow of doubt gnawed at me. What if it was a trap? What if the transmission was not from survivors, but from something else? Something mimicking us. I remembered the infected from earlier that night. The way they had moved, coordinated, adapted. They were changing, evolving. If they could learn movement, could they also imitate voices? Could they use what we trusted most, human sound, to lure us out? I sat down again, staring at the silent radio. Static filled the room, but beneath it, I thought I heard faint breathing. Not mechanical, not rhythmic, human. I froze, holding my breath. What is anyone hearing? This, a voice whispered, almost pleading. I wanted to respond. I almost did. But I had learned something in my years of training. Desperation makes people careless, and carelessness gets you killed. Instead, I waited. 5 minutes, 10. The voice never came again. Only the static remained. Max lifted his head, growling softly. His eyes fixed on the window, ears perked. I turned off the radio, the sudden silence deafening. Somewhere outside in the black distance, something moved. The transmission had ended, but the question remained, echoing louder than the storm. If others were alive, I had to know. Even if it killed me. The night air tasted of smoke and metal when I stepped outside for the first time in days. The world that once hummed with life had fallen silent, broken only by the sound of distant sirens and the crackling of fires devouring what was left of the city. I had packed everything with precision: food, water, ammunition, medical supplies, maps, and a few old field manuals that felt more like memories than tools now. Max stayed close to my side, his movement steady but tense, his instincts sharper than ever. The truck's engine coughed before roaring to life, the sound echoing down the hollow street. I flinched at the noise. Every sound felt dangerous now. Every vibration could draw them. But staying meant dying slowly, and I had already buried too much hope in these concrete walls. As I drove past the edge of my neighborhood, I saw things that made my stomach twist. Cars left with doors hanging open, Groceries scattered across the asphalt, streetlights blinking in dying loops of power. A stroller lay overturned beside a fire hydrant, tiny shoes still strapped in. It was like time had stopped mid-scream. The road ahead was cracked and slick from the night rain. Smoke curled upward from the city center, a thick black column that glowed faintly orange at its base. Something big had burned there. Maybe everything. I switched on the shortwave scanner mounted on the dashboard, hoping to catch the transmission again. Nothing but static. I glanced at the map taped beside the steering wheel. 20 miles north to the fuel depot. 20 miles of silence, uncertainty, and possibly worse. Max growled low, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. I slowed the truck. At first I saw nothing, just shadows and drifting fog. Then they appeared. Dozens of them stumbling through the intersection. Some moved slow, dragging twisted limbs. Others were faster, twitching with unnatural rhythm, their heads jerking toward the sound of my engine. A horde. I turned off the headlights immediately and cut the engine. Darkness swallowed us whole. I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. The infected moved closer, drawn to where the sound had last echoed. Their movements were no longer random. They seemed to sense direction, communication, almost like a swarm adapting. I grabbed a flare from the glove compartment and cracked it open. The red light hissed to life, staining the fog crimson. I threw it far to the left into an alleyway full of trash bins. The infected turned as one, their heads snapping toward the glow, then rushed toward it in jerky, hungry waves. The sound of their footsteps and uneven, desperate whirring faded as they chased the distraction. I started the engine again, this time keeping it low and slow, coasting down the opposite road. Max stayed perfectly still, eyes fixed out the window. He knew as well as I did. One mistake meant both of us were gone. After what felt like an hour, I reached the outskirts of the city. A police checkpoint stood half-collapsed across the road, barricades scattered, floodlights dead. The blue and white vehicles were riddled with bullet holes, windows shattered. I stopped the truck a few meters away and stepped out, shotgun raised. The air smelled of dried blood and oil. Bodies lay everywhere. Officers, civilians, soldiers, all mixed in one silent massacre. Some had turned, their eyes clouded white, their skin marbled and stretched. Others looked unfinished, frozen between life and death. Then I heard it, a wet, broken whisper. "Help. Me." I turned toward the sound. Behind an overturned police car, someone was moving. I approached slowly, keeping my weapon steady. What I saw made me stop cold. It was a man in a torn military vest, his jaw half gone, his neck shredded open. Somehow he was still alive. His one good eye rolled toward me. I knelt beside him. "You are military?" He nodded weakly, blood bubbling at his throat. "Camp Delta," they said, "secure lab." His hand twitched, gripping my sleeve. "Patient Zero was military. It started with us." I froze. "What do you mean?" He coughed, a thick black liquid spilling from what was left of his mouth. "They tested regeneration serum. We thought weapon." His body jerked violently, then went still. The smell of rot grew stronger. I stood up, staring down at him, my mind reeling. Patient Zero was military. We were supposed to fight the outbreak, not cause it. The thought hit like a memory I'd tried to bury. Years ago, I had worked near a classified facility just outside the state border. They called it Project Rebirth. I had never asked what it was about because in the military, curiosity was not a virtue. It was a risk. Now I knew. Max barked once, snapping me back to the present. More infected were coming, the air filled with the sound of shuffling feet and distant growls. I jumped back into the truck and slammed the door. The engine roared, and I drove straight through the half-open barricade. Metal scraped against metal as I pushed through. The rearview mirror showed a nightmare unfolding. Silhouettes emerging from the fog, sprinting, stumbling, some even crawling after the truck. Their screams were distorted like static given a voice. I did not look back again. I just kept driving north, my hands gripping the wheel so tight they hurt. The road stretched on endlessly, and the horizon glowed faintly with the fires of a dying civilization. Somewhere ahead lay the extraction point. Somewhere ahead may be hope. But the words of that dying soldier echoed inside my head like a curse. The virus started where we were trained to fight it. The road north ended in silence. The sign beside the highway read Marion General Hospital, its letters half melted from fire. Windows were shattered, vines crawling up the concrete walls like veins. The place looked like it had been abandoned for months, yet the air felt wrong, too still, too heavy, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I parked the truck behind an overturned ambulance and cut the engine. Max jumped out first, nose low to the ground, tail stiff. Even he seemed to sense that this was not just another ruin. This was something worse. The front doors had been blown open from the inside. I stepped carefully through the wreckage, flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a reception area frozen in panic. Chairs overturned, stretchers scattered, a child stuffed bear lying in a pool of dried blood. The generator lights flickered weakly in the distance, running on fumes. Someone had been here recently. I moved deeper inside, past the broken elevator shafts and shattered glass. The deeper I went, the more the hospital changed. Signs of a normal medical facility faded into something else. Reinforced steel doors, keypad locks, hazard warnings marked Biohazard Level 4. This was not just a hospital. It had been a testing site. My gut clenched. The name from the checkpoint echoed in my mind. Patient Zero was military. I followed a hallway lined with burned papers and blackened walls. Near the end, I found a door still intact, half melted but open enough to see through. The sign read, Sub-Level 3, Research Wing. Inside, the air smelled of bleach and rot. I found a pile of folders scattered across a metal desk. The top one read Project Revenant in bold, faded ink. My hands trembled as I opened it. Each page was filled with notes, military jargon mixed with medical terms. I scanned line after line until the words began to blur. Subject viability post-mortem, 14 minutes. Neural reactivation, successful. Aggression uncontrollable. Cognitive, retention lost after 7 minutes, and containment, breach likely from batch 12. There were signatures at the bottom, high-ranking ones. I recognized one of them, a general I had once taken orders from. I flipped through more files and found photos attached with paper clips, soldiers in containment suits, hooked up to machines. In the next image, those same soldiers were standing again, eyes glazed, muscles stiff. Their mouths hung open as if caught mid-scream. One had a note beneath it, reanimation stable, aggression increasing. My stomach turned. They were trying to bring the dead back. The more I read, the clearer it became. Project Revenant was never about healing. It was about control. They were trying to create soldiers who would never die. Soldiers who could keep fighting even after death. They had failed horribly. A terminal blinked faintly on a nearby desk. I brushed off the dust and tapped the keyboard. To my surprise, it flickered to life. A corrupted file appeared on the screen labeled Test Footage 17B, Rebirth Simulation. I hesitated, then pressed play. The video was grainy, recorded through a security feed. A group of men in military uniforms stood around a stretcher. On it lay a soldier with a bullet wound through his head. One of the doctors injected something into the base of his skull, a clear liquid that shimmered under the fluorescent light. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the body twitched. Once, twice. Then the chest began to rise and fall. The eyes opened, white, unfocused, wrong. The soldier sat up abruptly, jerking like a marionette, his mouth stretching unnaturally wide. One of the men in uniform shouted, "Restrain him!" But it was too late. The reanimated soldier lunged, teeth sinking into the nearest man's throat. Screams filled the room. Blood splattered the camera lens. The footage cut to static. I stepped back, heart pounding. The sound of that first scream, it did not feel like a monster's. It felt human, terrified. Suddenly I heard a loud crash from below. Metal bending, something heavy slamming against doors. Max barked sharply, his fur bristling. I turned off the monitor and grabbed my gear. Whatever had been contained here was not contained anymore. The emergency lights flickered as I moved through the hallways. The building groaned with movement. I could hear shuffling, low growls, and then a kind of scream. It echoed up through the vents, distorted and wet. I reached the stairwell, flashlight sweeping across the walls. Blood smeared the railing. Something had clawed its way upward recently. Max growled again, low and deep, staring down the steps. Then a hand gripped the lower railing. Pale, trembling skin stretched thin. The body that followed was a nurse, or what was left of one. Her head tilted sideways, bones cracking. Her eyes were rolled completely white, yet she moved with a kind of broken intelligence, reacting to my sound, my breathing. I fired once, clean, through the skull. She dropped instantly, but more footsteps followed below. Dozens of them. I ran. My boots echoed through the corridor, each step followed by a chorus of distant snarls. The infected were climbing. The walls shook as they slammed into doors, their bodies relentless, driven by something far stronger than hunger. I reached the exit at the far end of the wing. The steel door was jammed halfway shut. I forced it open, scraping my arms raw, and pushed Max through first. As I followed, the overhead lights began to burst one by one, popping in rapid succession, plunging the hall into darkness. Outside, the rain had started again, washing the blood from my hands in thin red streams. The hospital loomed behind me, massive and silent except for the muffled sounds of chaos within. I stood there, breath ragged, staring at the building where the world had ended, not because the dead rose, but because men in uniforms tried to make them rise. The truth was simple. The dead did not come back to life, we brought them back. The road to the extraction point felt endless. Smoke drifted across the horizon like ghosts of cities long gone. Every mile was a reminder that the world I had trained to protect was now nothing but ash. My fuel gauge hovered near empty, and Max had stopped barking hours ago. He just stared out the window, ears twitching at distant echoes of screams that came and went with the wind. The map on my lap showed the coordinates, a rural field just north of the old airstrip. That was where the faint radio signal had originated, a military channel encrypted with codes I had not heard since my service days. Extraction Point Delta, they called it. A place for survivors, a chance at salvation. When I finally reached it, the sky had turned an ugly orange-gray. The field was surrounded by burnt-out vehicles and makeshift barricades. I could see movement near the center and people. There were maybe 10 of them, civilians mostly, covered in dirt and exhaustion. A few carried rifles that looked too heavy for their trembling hands. As I stepped out of the truck, every pair of eyes turned toward me. A woman in a torn uniform approached, her expression sharp. "Identify yourself." I raised my hands slightly, keeping my voice calm. "Sergeant Cole Mercer, U.S. Army, 12th Recon Division." Her face changed. Recognition flickered, then fear. "12th Recon?" she whispered. The others began murmuring, uneasy. "You were part of that unit," one man said, backing away. "You helped start this." The words hit harder than any bullet. I wanted to deny it, to explain that I had not known what the program truly was, that I had only followed orders like everyone else. But even as I opened my mouth, I knew it would sound hollow. The woman glared at me, rifle trembling slightly. "If you were in Revenant Command, you might be infected. You could be carrying it." Max stepped forward, teeth bared, a low growl rumbling through his chest. The group tensed. For a moment it felt like the standoff could turn deadly. I lowered my weapon slowly, speaking quietly. "If I was infected, you would already be dead. I'm just trying to get out, same as you." Silence. Only the sound of the wind cutting through the empty field. Then a faint mechanical roar broke the stillness. Above us a helicopter appeared, military-grade, spotlight sweeping the area. The survivors erupted in desperate cheers, waving their arms. The woman shouted into her radio. "This is Delta Team. We have survivors requesting evacuation." The helicopter circled once, low enough that I could see the pilot's face behind the glass. But then it pulled up sharply, rotors whining. Over the radio came a cold, clipped voice, "Warn negative. LZ is compromised. Infected inbound." I looked toward the tree line on movement. dozens of infected spilling out of the forest, drawn by the noise. Their faces were blank, bodies jerking as they ran faster than before. The survivors panicked. Some fired wildly, others dropped to their knees screaming at the helicopter to come back. Max barked furiously as I loaded another shell into the shotgun. The helicopter hovered for a moment longer. I thought maybe they would land after all. But then the voice returned, colder this time. "We cannot risk exposure. God help you all." And then it was gone. The sound of its rotors faded into the distance, swallowed by the moans of the infected. The woman stared after it, disbelief written across her face. "They left us," she whispered. I watched as the first of the infected broke through the outer barricades. "No," I said quietly. "They were never coming." I fired each shot precise, controlled, years of training reduced to raw survival. Max stayed close, circling, snapping at anything that got too near. The survivors fought too, their fear turning into desperate courage. But it was hopeless. There were too many. Through the chaos, I heard one of the survivors shouting at me, "You knew! You were part of them. This is your fault." I could not argue. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was all my fault. When my last shell was spent, I switched to the Glock and backed toward the truck. Max jumped in first, his fur slick with rain and blood. The others were falling one by one, screaming as the infected tore through the barricades. I started the engine, but I did not drive away immediately. I just sat there for a second, watching the helicopter disappear into the clouds. The radio still hissed faintly on the dashboard. Broken fragments of voices lost in static. For the first time, I realized something that made my chest go cold. I was not meant to be saved. The field was burning by the time I made my choice. The truck engine growled, waiting for me to drive, but I never put it in gear. Behind me, a handful of survivors were still running north, silhouettes swallowed by smoke and ash. I could have gone with them. I could have tried to outrun what was coming. But that was not what soldiers did. I turned the key, killing the engine. The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. I opened the glove compartment, pulled out the last of my C4 packs, the detonator, and a handful of flares. My movements were automatic, mere clean, practiced, efficient. Every motion felt like a ritual. Max stood near the door watching me. His fur was matted, one ear torn, but his eyes were clear and sharp. He knew. He always knew. I knelt beside him, placing my hand on his head. "You can go," I whispered. "Run with him. You can still make it." He didn't move. Just pressed his head against my hand and stayed there. Loyal to the end. The infected were close now. I could hear them, hundreds of feet trampling over mud and debris. Their screams blended into the wind, a sick, hungry roar that made the trees tremble. I grabbed the radio one last time and switched to the emergency frequency. Static hissed, but no voices answered. Everyone who could have heard me was either dead or gone. Still I spoke. My voice was calm, steady, like the start of a briefing. "This is Sergeant Cole Mercer, U.S. Army. Reporting final defensive action at Extraction Point Delta. Multiple infected hostiles inbound. Area compromised. Initiating containment protocol." I paused, looking out at the tree line. Shadows moved between the trunks, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Their eyes glowed faintly in the reflection of the burning sky. I set the explosives around the barricades, wiring them to the detonator strapped to my vest. Every click of metal felt like punctuation on a story I already knew the ending to. When I finished, I stood by the center of the field, shotgun in one hand, Max at my side. The first infected stumbled out of the woods. Then another. Then a swarm. Their faces twisted, broken, unrecognizable. But in some, I thought I saw familiar features. Soldiers. Men I had once trained with. The realization hit like a punch. The experiment had not just failed, it had consumed its own creators. I aimed carefully and fired. One fell, then another. The recoil was steady, familiar, almost comforting. Max lunged at the nearest infected, tearing it down before it could reach me. For a moment it felt like any other mission. Strategy, precision, control. But deep down I knew it was just delay. The horde kept coming, climbing over their own dead. faces blank but driven by something that felt almost intelligent. Project Revenant, I muttered to myself. Reanimation through control. The control part had worked too well. I pressed the radio again. If anyone hears this, survive, do not come here. Do not trust the signals. End transmission. The static swallowed my words. For a second I thought I heard something underneath it. Faint rhythmic breathing. Then a voice that sounded almost like mine whispered back through the static. Cole. I froze. It could not be. It had to be interference or my mind breaking under the noise. But then it repeated and clearer this time. Cole, stay. The infected were nearly upon us now. Max barked once sharply like a signal. I exhaled, thumb brushing over the detonator's switch. Good boy, I said softly. The world turned white. The explosion tore through the field, fire swallowing everything. The infected, the barricades, the sky itself. The shockwave knocked me backward, heat biting into my skin, and then just silence. No screams, no movement, only the hiss of the wind sweeping through the flames. As the smoke thickened, the radio on the ground crackled once more. Through the static, faint but persistent, a whisper threaded through the noise. It said my name. Over and over the blast took them all, but the static kept whispering my name. The world had gone quiet again. No more gunfire, no helicopters, no screaming. Just the slow, endless hum of wind moving through what was left. It was weeks later when a lone scavenger stumbled upon the ruins of Extraction Point Delta. The earth was scorched black. Trees splintered into ash and wire. Charred helmets and broken radios littered the ground like bones. He almost turned back until he heard it. A faint, rhythmic sound cutting through the silence. Barking. The scavenger froze, hand instinctively gripping his rifle. The sound came from beneath the debris, somewhere under the collapsed bunker hatch. He pried at the twisted metal until it gave way, coughing as dust and smoke poured out. Inside it was dark. The smell of burnt fuel and death hung thick in the air. His flashlight beam cut through it, sweeping over cracked walls and melted steel, until it stopped on movement. A dog, thin, scarred, but alive. Its eyes caught the light, golden and alert. It didn't growl. It didn't run. It just stood guard beside something. A human shape still draped in tattered camouflage. The scavenger's breath caught in his throat. He stepped closer slowly. The man's hand still clutched a detonator, his other resting near a silent radio. His name tag was half burned, but one word remained. Mercer. The dog barked once, low and warning. The message was clear. Don't touch him. The scavenger lowered his weapon, bowing his head in quiet respect. You did good, soldier, he murmured. You both did. He turned to leave someone, but just as he reached the doorway, the radio crackled to life. Static at first. Then a voice, broken but unmistakable. This is Sergeant Cole Mercer. Reporting containment. Holding position. The scavenger froze, staring back at the bunker. The dog lifted its head, ears twitching. The voice continued, warped, looping, fragments of an echo trapped between worlds. Cole Mercer. Holding position. Containment. Holding. The radio flickered once more, the light dimming. Outside, the sky was gray, the kind of gray that never lifts. He whispered to no one. He planned for the end of the world. What he never planned for was becoming part of it.